We are joined now for the first time by Martin Sherman, who is a security expert in Israel, living on the coast near Khazaria, I guess. And he writes for Newsmax as of very recently. He just started writing there. Fine conservative publication. He also writes the Into the Fray column. And I got to thank Liz Harrison Hayden again for pushing me to get him on the show. But we're going to talk a little bit about Israel security for about 12 minutes. And Martin, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, your most recent piece is really picture-oriented, and I highly suggest that people go look at it, look you up at newsmax.com, but it emphasizes and it's very visual, how precarious a position Israel and some important Israeli institutions would be if they established a so-called Palestinian state in the West Bank. And I'm trying to do this without the pictures here, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about the point you were getting at there.
Well, one of the things that people don't realize is the importance of topography. You know, people talk about a Palestinian state, and they don't realize the constraints there are on Israel, both in terms of geographical distance and topographical structure. The whole of Israel is about 70 kilometers wide, which is, I should imagine, about 45 miles. So it's a very narrow strip of land, but it's only narrow. The area designated for a Palestinian state is comprised of hills overlooking the most populous area in Israel, i.e. the coastal plain, which lies along the Mediterranean Sea. And from those highlands, any forces deployed there can see and control in terms of observation, electronic surveillance, and firepower with even primitive weapons, all Israel's airfields, military and civilian, including its only international airport, Ben Gurion Airport, nearly all its seaports and naval bases, vital infrastructure installations and systems like power generation, power conveyance, water, the transport system, both rail and road. In fact, if a Palestinian state is established on something approaching the pre-1967 Green Line borders, the main Trans-Israel Highway will in some places run 70 meters, which is probably it's around about 70, 80 yards from the road. So, you know, you've probably heard the news in Gaza about tunnels and attack tunnels and terrorists trying to burrow their way into Israel for attacks. So you can imagine if this territory was handed over to the Palestinians, and because there's a lot of commercial and agricultural area very close to the prescribed border, there are all sorts of cover and camouflage to conceal and to hide tunneling activity to get rid of the excavated dirt, etc., etc. So, but not only that, just ordinary ambush with the small arms could easily cause havoc on the road. So this is the danger. Israel will be almost impossibly vulnerable, and anyone sitting on those highlands overlooking the coastal plain could disrupt at will Israel's economic and social routine, making life very, very onerous. And then you'd be confronted with a terrible dilemma. What do you do? Mm-hmm. Do you launch a massive preemptive strike on this newly established Palestinian state with huge collateral damage, or do you continue to suffer attrition?
Yeah, no, I mean, that picture to me of the highway was perhaps the most striking one of all, though how close territory of the Palestinian states would be to the runways in the airport was also pretty striking too. I mean, but I can't emphasize enough. Yeah. It's nice to do audio here, but you got to see the pictures at Newsmax. What you wrote about most recently in your Into the Fray column was about the ghettoization, which is a strong loaded term, of Israel that might occur with various peace processes. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that also.
Well, one of the fiercest arguments in Israel are between the people who oppose territorial concessions and those who endorse them. The people who endorse them have traditionally said we should sacrifice territory for the sake of peace. But I think it's becoming clearer and clearer to most people, even dedicated two-state advocates, that peace is really not around the corner, but rather an admit error. What they're trying to do now is find all sorts of configurations which will keep their dream of a Palestinian state alive. Mm-hmm. And one of the ideas that is being floated at the moment is that, well, listen, there's so many Jewish settlers across the 1967 Green Lines. It's not realistic to coercively evacuate them. So what we'll do is basically we'll leave them in these enclaves, which would be territorially disconnected from mainland in Israel, and they would be under Israeli sovereignty as isolated enclaves. Now, of course, this is, people give all sorts of examples which are totally irrelevant, like Belgium and Holland. But of course, given the hundreds year animosity between the Arabs and the Jews, the enclaves will turn into isolated ghettos which have no opportunity of expanding. Every trip to work or social outing would be an ordeal because they probably have to have heavy escorts, which will cost a lot of money, and eventually the cries will be raised to stop this expenditure. What do we need it for? These people aren't, it's just not worth it. And then eventually I think they will be abandoned. Basically what you will have is the resurrection of what were once ghettos, Jewish communities surrounded by hostile environment. And I think this is a very, a very disturbing proposal that's being raised. It hasn't yet gained too much momentum, but you never know.
And I imagine the ghettos would be a lot more hostile than, say, the original ghetto, which I believe was in Venice when they talk about a ghetto. I mean, these people would be trying to kill...
Yeah, the environment, the working assumption should be that they will be an extremely hostile environment, especially if this is done with the kind of regimes and partners that you're seeing today. I mean, we saw when Israel withdrew from Gaza unilaterally, they left. The only thing that they left intact were the synagogues and the greenhouses.
Yep. And
they were all completely destroyed, immediately destroyed. The synagogues were desecrated. And these high-tech greenhouses, which could have generated a lot of employment and income for the Gazans, were also destroyed.
Yep.
So, I think that the prognosis is that these ghettos, these enclaves, would find themselves in an extremely hostile environment.
It would be almost like Hebron is right now, but Hebron has a certain historical necessity for Israel to be there. But it's, you have an enclave there that's Go on.
That's true, but today at least the IDF is deployed in the Hebron area. It's not as if that there's no access. The army would be deployed in here. I don't see how the army would be deployed on what is envisaged as being a sovereign Palestinian state. I don't think the Palestinians would take very kindly to that.
No.
And I don't know how people envisage the Jewish communities there being protected. And this, of course, it's just a cynical and callous ploy to say, well, listen, we will withdraw. You people stay there, knowing full well that they will not be able to stay there and have to withdraw as well.
And I imagine the Arab Muslims would be taking advantage of that considerably. You raise an interesting point. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say there would be no room for growth. I mean, I imagine they would be locked in. But one thing people don't realize is that the so-called settlers have a very high fertility rate as opposed to, well, actually, all of Israel's is pretty high, but certainly compared to the rest of Western civilization, people forget about a time when people would have like 7, 8 kids each, and they might want to live where they grew up. But it sounds like there would be no room for that. I mean, in America, you see the highly religious areas such as Kiryas Joel, and how quickly the areas expand because people grow up and have 9 kids each there. And I mean, if you saw the hills over there, you'd know what I'm talking about. But you know what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, sure. I think you're 100% correct. I think that they would be confined to a constricted area which will not allow development. As families grow, the children will probably have to leave. I don't think there'll be not many employment opportunities within that confined area, so people will either have to travel every day through hostile territory to find employment, or just leave and live somewhere else where they can make a living. You know, I think it's really a very pernicious proposal.
So what do you suggest be done?
What I suggest be done is that many people as possible point out the dangers and the defects and the detrimental nature of these things, and take it off the public agenda as soon as possible. You know, I'm worried that the new danger to the Jewish settlements across the 1967 Green Line is no longer really evacuation or large-scale evacuation, but large-scale abandonment. And I think that has to be raised in the public discourse, and the dangers and the hazards underscored, so that the Israeli public will not accept it.
Any final thoughts, Martin, before I let you go, about any events that may have occurred this week?
Well, you know, one of the things that happened that there was one of the Arab parties here by the name of Balad had a summer camp identifying with the Palestinian terrorists and challenging the nature of the Jewish, or the nature of the Jewish state, in other words, the Jewish character of the state. And I think it's also a very disturbing development, and I think this is something that the Israeli authorities need to confront robustly, because you know, the limits of free speech must prevent sedition and incitement to violence against your own people. So I think this is a very disturbing development, and I would hope that there's still enough political resolve in Israel to confront this robustly.
All right. Thank you, Martin Sherman. I guess you can be found most easily at newsmax.com and the Into the Fray blog. Did I forget anything there? Are you on Twitter, by the way?
Not very prominently. I'm more on Facebook.
Okay, yeah, that's where I linked up with you. Well, thank you for coming on Backlash today.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me.